Lee Valley Tools, named for and by the late Leonard Lee of Woodena, Saskatchewan, or at least from a farm just north of there. He was raised in a log house built by his father, no electricity, no running water, and maybe that was the beginning of his love of woodworking and even the tools that go along with it. He was a public servant, an entrepreneur, and an ethical capitalist. We'll get into that in just a moment. We are joined by Leonard's son. Leonard passed away 4 years ago at the age of 77, and Robin Lee took over the famous company. And it's just such a pleasure to meet you and see you and have this conversation about your dad and the work that you all do. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, as I've been in the store, of course, and I've known your father over the years because we bonded about Woodena, Saskatchewan. There are a few of us, but he was born in Woodena, but the farm was just a little out of town, right? I mean, a little north.
That's right. It was apparently it was uphill to walk anywhere from the farm in Woodena.
As the story goes. 5
Yeah.
miles in bare feet, no shoes. Is there still family there? Do you still have a connection?
Yes, I still have an aunt who's somewhere outside of Saskatoon.
Okay.
And I think that our hearts are still in Saskatchewan.
Absolutely.
It's many people think Toronto's the center of the universe, and
No.
I grew up knowing that it was Saskatchewan.
Absolutely. Okay. You are definitely an honorary Saskatchewanian, and you can come anytime because I'm right there. We'll go on a little tour. Okay.
For sure.
Now I love this story so much. So if you know what a rasp is, you will love this story. And if you know what a lemon zester is, you will know this story. But Leonard's wife, and of course, Robin's mother, Lorraine, seems she was quite the inventor. Tell us the little story about how this came about.
Well, back in the old days when we actually had industry trade shows that we could go to, we would go to the National Hardware Show, which was held at McCormick Place in Chicago every year. And I would, of course, travel with Dad, and we'd share a hotel room. And we found this tiny company in the basement of the North Hall of McCormick Place, a company by the name of Grace Manufacturing. And they actually made tools for surgery. And they had this really, really cool rasp that came out of the technology for shaping bone.
Whoa.
But they figured it would be a good wood rasp.
Yes.
And so, we were quite excited about it. And so we got a sample and took it home and declared it at the border, of course.
Right.
But took a sample home, and it was left in the kitchen. And Mom picked it up and figured it was a zester. And she just happened to be making one of Dad's favorite desserts, which is an Armenian orange cake out of the Best of Bridge book.
Of course.
And so she grabbed that rasp and she said, "This is the best zester I have ever used." And so we tried it out in the catalog that year, and it got a tremendous reception. And the following year, Martha Stewart actually ordered 100, I think it was 100 rasps from us to give as her personal Christmas gift that year.
And what is it today? Does it still exist in the catalog?
We still carry the original one.
Okay.
That was to be a wood rasp, and we still think that's the best model. But Grace Manufacturing has gone on to make an entire industry out of the microplane rasps and the microplane zesters, and it's just turned into a huge business.
Okay, I'm coming to the store. I'm going to get an original. Sorry, carry on.
Well, they will actually say, if you go to their website, that it was discovered by a Canadian housewife.
Yeah, well, and so it was.
Yeah.
It happens to have the merit of truth. All right, your father, of course, was, before he became an entrepreneur and an innovator, he had worked for the federal government in the Canadian Foreign Service and had traveled around the world. But there was always this frustration that he felt. And he said, one thing I learned in government is that the atmosphere makes a huge difference in the productivity of individuals. In the government, you have lots of responsibility, but no authority. I guess that led him into the business world in some way.
Well, I think it did. And, truthfully, I think that he was perhaps spoiled by having really good managers early on in his government career.
Right.
And maybe when the public service was an awful lot smaller and there was, more authority at different levels and a tighter connection, it functioned a little bit differently. But he felt that it had changed over time, where he was no longer able to do the things that were right in many cases, or had a lot of difficulty in getting the authority to do the things that were right, because of course the easiest thing is to do nothing and maintain the status quo.
Right.
And
just wait till the minister changes or the government changes and carry on.
That's right. And he really did have a tremendous respect for the number of incredibly competent people that were in public service, but he felt that the ratio was changing a little bit as his career progressed.
Well, I knew your father, who was very active in the public policy forum, which I was as well, and you always got that sense. I mean, he was a public policy wonk. There's no question.
Yeah, he really does. He felt very strongly about Canada and about not only how good I want to say great a country it is, but how much it could be better all of the time.
Yes.
And he often said that, when he was giving speeches at universities, he usually started off by saying, "You've already won the lottery. You've been born into the best country in the world, with all of the opportunity and all of the social programs and support that, of course, probably came out of Saskatchewan."
Yes.
But, he was very patriotic, and, instead of just being frustrated, he wanted to put himself into a position where he could continue to do some good, even if it was on the outside.
So he got this notion. I mean, Lee Valley Tools. By that time, he was living in the Ottawa Valley. Lee is pretty obvious, but this connection with woodworking from the house that your grandfather built, and this contact with, I don't know, doing something with your hands. Obviously, when you're a civil servant, when you work for government, you push a lot of paper, but you don't get that satisfaction of creating something, building something. Do you think that's what inspired him?
Well, I think it really did, but I think that when you're creating something and you're building or working with physical creation, your results depend on your own competence and your own foresight and your own commitment. And I think that's what attracted him to a lot of manual work. And of course, he grew up on a farm, and, you couldn't jump in the car you didn't have and go to the box store that wasn't there,
right,
to solve your problems. You had to figure out how to solve your problems with what you had at hand, which was usually very little. So I know for years, when we would go to an auction sale, invariably a chain would come up and he would buy it because they never had enough chains on the farm. And he couldn't resist, buying another chain for the tractor.
And every farmer is an entrepreneur, because they do have to solve that problem at 2 a.m. or 11 p.m. And they, as you say, they can't go to the store.
They absolutely can't. And you'd call them an ethical capitalist. I would have said he was a social capitalist almost, because he was, again, Saskatchewan, rural roots, community and cooperatives was everything.
CCF, that's right.
He had a real social conscience. And I think that's grounded in, people that work with their hands have their output is there for everybody to see. You can't be dishonest.
Right.
And I think there's almost I don't want to stereotype, but there's an honesty and integrity about people that are working with their hands. That's almost innate. And
the product is there. I mean, either the table is built or the cupboard is hung, or it isn't.
That's exactly right.
You seem to have adopted a lot of his notions. When he went into business, he said, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he said, we are going to do this differently. Our employees are going to want to work where they work. We are going to share the benefits of success in our company. There will be bonuses. No executive that ever works for Lee Valley Tools will ever make more than 10 times what the lowest paid employee makes. These are radical kind of notions.
Well, it really is, and those are still true today, by the way.
Good for you.
It's well, the truth is if you're the CEO, you can still only wear one pair of pants at a time. You can still only drive one car, and it's you have the responsibility to preserve the culture and to create and preserve the employment for all of those people. In many respects, the family works for the staff, not the other way around.
Right.
We all work together, but our responsibility is to look after them.
I think it was your father that said, I'm looking at this, growth for growth's sake is the ideology of a cancer cell. It needs to be about something else.
Well, that's right. And I use an earthier analogy because I say, if you grow too fast, you get stretch marks. And, when we're talking about strategic planning, one of the things you're supposed to have is a wildly audacious goal. And our wildly audacious goal is sustainable growth for the next 100 years, not growth at all costs,
right?
Just sustainable. So we can compensate people more. We can challenge them, that we can have, meaningful employment. And that means, commitments to manufacturing, for example. We can't all be, bankers, dentists, and lawyers.
Right.
We actually have to make things in this country. And so that's very ingrained in the philosophy of the company.
And do you still subscribe to the notion that things should be manufactured whenever possible domestically, and you might reach out to the U.S., but you're really trying to create that center of excellence in places here?
Yes, I think that there's no reason why we can't. I mean, historically, it's been the value of labor that has created the differences around the world. And, here's the socialist upbringing is, everybody should have a living wage. And, the value of labor shouldn't determine where things are made.
Yeah.
It's as a nation, you have the responsibility to keep your friends and neighbors employed, because they are your customers.
Exactly. But people don't, by and large, subscribe to that, understand it, believe it, or put it in practice.
No, and I think that they're either very agnostic to the concept, or they're uber patriotic that, I'm only going to buy things made in Canada.
Right.
But the truth is, if you want to sell things to Germany, you should be buying things from Germany. If you want to sell things to China, you should be buying things from China. There should always be a balance. And that's where economic theory comes in, and balance of trade and all of that. But if you want customers in other countries, you have to consume and build and invest there too.
Not just your own.
That's correct.
The company has grown, as you say, in a sustainable way, but now more than 1,000 employees and 20 retail outlets, even though you started as a catalog operation, a mail order operation, which almost sounds like some, notion that nobody would understand in the age of the internet, but you have adapted to all of that as well.
Yes. And I think we're very fortunate to be in, to have a product line that involves tactile exploration. When you're buying tools, you've got to hold them. And there's a very large social component to craft and to skill. I mean, many people are very proud of what they do, and they want to talk about it with other people. So I think that, the challenge for retail in the Amazon age, the internet, e-commerce age, is that physical presence in retail has got to add value for the customer. Whether it's through experience, whether it's through learning, whether it's, whether your store is a social space, I think people still need that human connection.
Did you see in your own company the COVID bump? People staying at home, fixing stuff they've never had time to fix, all of that, ordering things online?
Well, we did see a bump. We saw an awfully big dive when we had to shut everything down, and I think that.
Why did you have to shut everything down?
Well,
The
we had to close the
manufacturing
retail
side.
stores.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, but even manufacturing, as an employer, and we have only had one employee test positive for COVID to this point in time, which
Touch wood.
we're very proud of.
Yeah.
And that employee was in Nevada.
Okay.
So it was in our American warehouse.
Yeah.
We haven't had a positive case in Canada yet. But, we've had to re-engineer the entire business. We've had to zone the buildings. We've got people working at home. We've got isolated shifts in the machine shop. And it is a bit of a stressful relearning time, but, in adversity, there's often opportunity too. And so there's a lot of learning. I've personally been working at home for more than 5 months. Never would have believed that could be possible before. And, but we're adapting and we're learning.
And so are you back still building and creating products so that people can be ordering it so they can be doing stuff in their garage?
Well, we're trying to hire right now.
Wow.
One of the problems that we had is we have a fair number of older staff in our stores. It's jokingly our customers say, "I can't wait to retire and come work for you," in the stores because it's so much fun. But those are all the people who don't want to work in retail right now because of the risk. So, on one hand, we do have some opportunity, but on the other hand, we've got a lot of challenges with getting, staff and experienced staff. I don't think we've ever had a full complement in our machine shop, because those are, a machinist technical job is typically filled by, immigrants where, coming from countries where manual trades are valued more. And now immigration shut down. So there's all kinds of very subtle effects to COVID. That's difficult.
It's kind of bridging that gap too, because your customers and your employees would be people who had some experience with this, like your father who grew up in a house built by his dad. You grew up watching that and having a sensibility about it. But kids who've grown up in a house or a condo and they're off to university, what's their connection to working with their hands, to building something when you can go to, IKEA and get it for $19?
Well, and I think that's absolutely correct. When I'm talking to staff, I often say, I'll bet you can remember if you're my age, taking woodworking classes in school and going home and saying, "Look what I made."
Right.
That "look what I made" moment. Not look at my high score or, look at how many likes I got, but look what I made. And those are very, very formative moments. It embodies competency and self-worth and expression of our talent. But it's also uniqueness. And that's just as important whether you're a gardener, whether you're working in the kitchen, whether you're working in the home. And if you think about some of the reality TV that's really grown, renovation shows, cooking shows, things where people are doing physical things with their hands, really, really popular. And I think it's a little bit of a backlash to the technological sterile sort of education that
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I do think, and I think everybody's rediscovered that a little bit. I mean, when I was growing up, the girls took home ec, the boys took shop, right? But you were still making something. You were still, we were learning how to make lasagna or a cake or, putting the lemon zest in the favorite cake. But it was still that product. As you say, you came out and said, "Look at this. I made this." And it's really hard to do that.
Yeah, it really is. And I think generally people are coming to it a little bit later in life.
Yeah.
The millennials that are still living in their parents' basements or whatnot, they don't have a place to work with craft. They don't have a social circle that does that. And they certainly don't usually have a job requirement for it, but they come to appreciate it a little bit later in their life.
So who's your customer today?
Well, our customer tends to be at the farther end of the demographic scale.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say probably 40 years old and up. Because the tools we sell are expensive. The time you need to use the tools, you got to be committed to working by yourself, or it's not travel related, and it's not consumption sort of related. And I think it sort of fits people's personal development and point in life. That I'm going to try and make a guitar.
Yeah.
Or build a canoe, or grow a garden.
Yeah.
But I really think that fundamentally, our education system has missed an opportunity to give some of those physical experiences to kids.
I think your dad said, I was reading at one point here, people, many of whom grew up with a father who made a living being a plumber or an electrician or a carpenter or a farmer, they want a hobby where they can see that again or feel that experience. I know I used to be in the basement with my dad. He made shot. He built bullets, and I used to weigh out the shot and help him do it. I'm not a hunter. I don't have any of that, but that was very valuable time I spent with him, and it was very close time. And your dad said there are very few people who are satisfied living a life where they do nothing that requires manual dexterity. That we actually crave that.
Well, I think we do, but I think you did touch on a point. It's also the time spent together.
Yeah.
And it's not time spent in each other's presence, watching television or a movie, but it's that social interaction, and I think in many ways, craft gives the opportunity for that social interaction and what creates those bonds of time, and it gives you some bad habits, like, I still pull nails and straighten them.
Oh, you're one of those. You've got jars in the basement, don't you?
I've got jars. You're exactly right. And I don't even use nails. I build with screws only, but I can't throw away nails. It's going to be somebody else's problem.
My father's shop was like that. It was unbelievable. He saved every jam jar, every quart sealer that my mother wasn't using, and they were all filled to the brim. And it didn't matter. Even when I left home, I could go home and say, Dad, I need this. And he could walk to the basement and find it and deliver it. Right. It would.
Well, there is a learning around a system like that where you actually can triage what it is that you should be keeping and not. And my rule is, if I haven't touched it in 20 years, I better watch it closely for another 10.
That's a very, very good theory. I want to talk a little bit about you and your notion about work. We have touched on this, the entrepreneur side, the innovator side of your family. Is that something you can learn by watching, by being in the presence of?
Yeah, I mean, we can all learn from everybody. One of my favorite things to do pre-COVID was to give customers tours of the machine shop and the organization, because I'll tell you, I learned something new every time I did that. And, it was usually your staff that are continually teaching you. And, again, there's all kinds of management studies that tell you, group results are better always than an individual. A decision arrived at by an individual, and entrepreneurs never want to believe that.
Right.
But it really is true. You do have to listen, and somebody can always teach you something. And I think that probably came from my grandmother, who was, the hardest working woman I ever knew, and
running a farm with no electricity and no water and no vehicle and no store. No kidding.
Well, and she ran a boarding house,
Wow.
and would make the bread and do all the laundry, and then she'd work as a cook on geodesic survey, and then she would volunteer with the church, and then she would, in her 80s, she was delivering meals with Meals on Wheels. And,
to the old folks.
Yeah, it's just sort of like a life of service and work and community. but always listening and never being judgmental.
So
you know,
you're
she was one of
steeped
the-
in that.
Well, I hope some of it rubbed off, because that'd be a good thing. You know, yeah, that's the environment I was brought up with.
Your dad once said that when he heard the phrase situational ethics, he said, I was nearly sick. Things are either right or they're wrong.
Yeah, it sounds like alternative facts.
Yeah, yes, it does. That's what situational ethics exactly sounds like and is. So those are the things.
He always believed in doing what was right, because he always said, you'll never lose sleep if you do what's right.
Yeah.
And it may be painful. You know, you may have to, give back a lot of money or spend a lot of money or something. But he said, you'll sleep well. And that was always the key thing for him. And, I've taken that to heart. Never go to bed angry.
Right.
I often will pen a really, really nasty letter to somebody, and then I'll just delete it when I'm done. It's very cathartic. But
it's the deleting part. You got to remember to hit delete. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Do not compose things like that in an open email.
Yes.
So, yeah, no, it really is about that. It's about, starting the next day, undisturbed,
yeah.
Unperturbed by what happened the previous day.
And no regret.
And no regrets. Yeah. Yeah. And, there's nothing wrong with mistakes too. I often tell people when they say, wow, how did you guys build this? I said, we've just made more mistakes than anybody else has.
I think any entrepreneur understands that failure is the best teacher.
Well, it really is. And it refines what you do. Those incremental mistakes is how you learn and how you get better. And all your competitors have to make all the same mistakes you made. So the best thing to do is make them fast before your competitors do.
I'm going to quote Robin Lee here. Good retail, the business you're in, is like performance art. Applause is in your sales. But you care about validation, but only in the sense of value, that people value what you do.
Yeah, that's what I really feel. It's sales are not the goal, and what I tell our store staff is, your job is to get that customer to come back.
Right.
It's not to sell them anything. You want to always be an option. So if you got to give them advice or tell them, Home Depot's got a better price, or, you don't really need that tool, that's exactly what you do. Because then you sleep well at night. And really, commerce is about providing value and getting value. And, if you walk into business or you walk into anything with a financial motivation, you're at a disadvantage right away.
Absolutely.
Because you're not focused on giving value.
I'm going to give the last word today to your dad, but I want to hear from you on it. If you never took a risk, you would never have got your first kiss.
That is one of his favorite lines, because it's a very common experience, and that's one of the marketing secrets. Is you always try to resolve everything down to a common experience. But I think just about everybody can remember what that nervous tension, excitement, whatever was, and that's how you're alive. Is when you feel things like that. If you're indifferent to what you're doing, you're wasting the little time you have left on the planet.
Yeah.
Really.
Take a risk. It's always worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know I said I was going to ask you one last question, but now I'm going to ask you another last question because we're talking about your father's mindset and how you have absorbed that and how you practice that in your own life. But And we're talking about taking risks. And so you must do something that's fun. When you do something for fun, are you taking risks too, or just in business?
Well, I think I am. I have a small shop in the basement, and I do dabble in making things. But what's really got me excited this week is I ordered a custom plane from a Canadian plane maker who I think is one of the best in the world, and he had a very special piece of wood that came from Colin Cripps of Blue Rodeo, and it was a piece of wood from the Maple Leaf Forever tree. And this is the tree that inspired Alexander Muir to write Maple Leaf Forever in 1867. And Conrad had a piece of this wood, and he only had enough to make 2 small planes. And of course, he was going to make one for him and one for me. And so he had this wood dyed red. It was a silver maple, so it's not particularly attractive, but he had it dyed red. And started building the plane with it. And it turned out to be gorgeous. And down the middle of the piece of wood appeared a white stripe. So I now have a red and white infill Canadian-made plane from possibly the most famous tree in Canada.
That is amazing. How big is this plane?
It's about 8 inches long and 1.5 inches wide. And it's made of a tool steel on the outside, and then they fill the inside very much like an Oreo cookie. So they sandwich the wood in between 2 pieces of steel to make the plane. And Conrad, who's whenever I say Conrad Sauer, it makes you think of a portly German machinist, but he's more like a boy band star,
right.
Good-looking young guy in Kitchener, who's, as I say, probably the best plane maker in the world. And I've been waiting 2 years for this plane. He just shipped it today.
What's the fascination?
The fascination is with craft.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's
there it is.
It's when you have a tool that has a story, and it doesn't have to be an expensive tool, it just has to have a story. You tend to use it with purpose, and you maintain it differently, and it produces better results. It's all in your approach. And anybody who plays golf knows that. You'll have confidence in this putter or this club or whatever. And it's you deal with things that have meaning to you differently.
Yes, well, this is planing of a very different sort, isn't it? It's just a lovely story.
Well, thank you. It's I get to be the custodian of this plane.
Yeah.
And it will be well documented and well preserved.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, to remember your dad, to see the legacy that he has left, not just this story, the store and the retail operation, but your family.
Well, thank you very much, because you and Dad have an awful lot of parallels coming from the same place, being involved in government and being honorary colonels.
Yes,
he was an honorary colonel as well.
Yeah.
And I'm probably a little bit jealous of I want to say your generation, but it sounds so bad to say that.
I'll take it.
But you're like the clique that none of us could ever be part of, because of the time that that you experienced, and the times that all of you experienced, and that's the thing I sit and try to imagine for my grandkids, is, oh my goodness, what's your world going to look like?
I know. I remember telling friends when I first moved to Toronto that I grew up without running water. And, they just looked at me as if I'd dropped from Mars, because they couldn't believe a Canada in which that was still real. But in rural Saskatchewan, it was very real for a very long time.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And when you grow up without, it gives you a tremendous appreciation for what you have. And it doesn't matter. There's always somebody that has more.
Yeah.
But, I think the lesson for our family is be grateful for all the things that you have, and work to make things better for everyone.
So good to talk to you. It's been a trip down memory lane, and you are absolutely right. I feel blessed that I came from where I came from and still get to call it home, and you are welcome there any hour of any day, 365 days a year. I hope.
Well, if you could just get this COVID thing fixed.
Okay.
I don't know if that's in the Senate purview, but I think we'll be hunkered down for a little while.
Yeah, a little while yet. Thanks so much, Robin.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.